I'm getting like raked over the coals on Twitter again. I wish I could talk to somebody about this because I want to see them like justify their arguments in real time. But like, man, the Houthi shit is like so. It's basically like the split is like people thinking that I'm like a insane, horrible neocon, whatever. But a lot of people being like, oh wow, Vosh is like the only sensible person. But the people who are saying that are all like sock dems and liberals, which is like pretty offensive to me, I guess. Fighting them is supposed to be World War III, isn't it? Yeah, bombing Yemen. It's not just Twitter lefties. The entire Discord of Majority Report has fallen for the brain rot. I feel like the community for the Majority Report has a very large number of leftists in it. Bombing Yemen is just tradition at this point. Yeah, look, it's just a bit of fun, you know? Lonerbox said you were the only one with good takes on this. It's just, again, like, it's just such a, like, easy layup, you know? It's so, I don't know. Are leftists, like, basically liberals? In the sense that they're wrong, yes. Everyone's wrong but me. Unironically on this issue. Kind of, usually uttered ironically, in this case, uttered sort of half sincerely, tentatively. I'm trying the words on with a bit of seriousness to see how it tastes in my mouth. My main problem is that it won't really deter the Houthis that much. Well, that we'll see, right? Like, that is a meaningful question. You know, to what extent will it be effective? Seeing Emma from MR defend them was pretty disappointing. Yeah. Emma's kind of an idiot, TBH. No, she's not. Emma, the Majority Report broadly, probably everyone. I think this is like post-Iraq War brain rot, to be honest. It's just people are very isolationist right now. And I like isolationism can lead you accidentally to some good outcomes and takes, but in many cases, I think it leads you to some rather bad ones, you know. I don't know. It's just... I was seeing Twitter leftists unironically post Houthi propaganda featuring their child soldiers and praising the children. I know what post you're thinking of, and I don't think that was like a Twitter leftist. I think that was just like, I think that was a person who has other ideological, you know, another axe to grind. I saw somebody posting the Houthi flag, curse upon the Jews, that one, and they were a Muslim living in London. What, by the way, really quick question. What is it with Muslims in London who are literally Hitler? Is it because like the broader UK population has done a bad job with integration, so there's this like hyper radicalized cell of Muslims who live in the UK, who like performatively reject any hope of like cultural assimilation and just like lean hardcore into you know, campism? Is that it? Okay, yeah. We don't have as much of that over here in the US. I mean, I'm sure there are some people like that, but there's a lot of irredentism in England. Yeah, it seems so. I guess if you live in a dying empire, you want to be anywhere but there, right? You know? Wouldn't airstriking the Yemen risk escalating the conflict and expanding it over the region? But so, when you ask questions like that, what do you mean specifically? When you say the conflict, what are you referring to? And when you talk about it expanding over the region, what are you referring to? You know? Like, conflicts aren't like magic. Like, there's systems that sort of guide the direction these things move in, you know? I guess a lot of people's understand. Okay, first and foremost, let's be clear. You know how people are saying that the Americans who are on board with bombing Yemen don't know where Yemen is? The Americans who aren't on board with bombing Yemen also don't know where Yemen is, okay? Most of the lefties who you see online who are saying shit like, this is just the American empire, like reinforcing Israel's desire to genocide, blah, blah, blah. Like, most of those people learned about Yemen yesterday. A lot of them are like 16. They have no clue. And because they frame literally all conflicts the exact same way, the Houthis become like an oppressed minority fighting off the great American evil, of which Saudi Arabia is an extension. And to a large extent, that is certainly the case for Yemen broadly, because we have assisted in the sanctions and the war effort, and we have allowed Saudi Arabia to engage in a genocide, or at least like massively destructive behavior in Yemen. But that's not really like an endorsement of the Houthis, you know? This is just the problem that we keep facing over and over and over again. Being a member of an oppressed group doesn't mean you're right about anything. It just doesn't. You can be right, but it doesn't mean you're right. There's nothing about suffering that makes your arguments better, you know? Like, you know, like the Confederates became an oppressed minority after we squashed them and engaged in like reparations. Does that make any of their whining about the lost war correct? No! Bully them harder, you know? Like the history doesn't work like that. It's just a tendency some people have to automatically assign like righteousness to people who are in some way victimized. Notwithstanding the fact, by the way, that the Houthis are not really the victims in the context of Yemen's civil war. The Houthis have done some monstrously bad things to the innocent civilians. Slavery, child brides, they're not really like, it's not that simple, you know? But a lot of people boil it all down because they engage in, unironically, the kind of like arrogant Western chauvinism that they accuse others of believing in by saying that, well, all Arabs are basically the same, right? So Houthis must be the same as the Yemenis broadly, and like if one of them's oppressed, all of them are oppressed, you know? Like, are black people in America oppressed? Yeah, absolutely. But if you had like a random serial rapist who was black running around Detroit, people, is that single person in the right when the police arrest them? No, of course not, because because that's dumb. You know, I don't know. This keeps happening, man. Being from an oppressed group is literally Israeli justification for their crimes against the Palestinians. That's true, yeah. Jews on a global level are objectively an oppressed group. There's no way around that. If you disagree with that, that's anti-Semitic. I'm sorry, it is. Like, holy shit, you know? And that is the excuse they use to do what they do with the Palestinians, that because they've been victimized, they have sort of unlimited permission to engage in this behavior. I mean, we're going to see that with the, you know, the tribunal. Have you seen Emma Vigeland's tweets? I mean, I saw one tweet of hers responding to a tweet of mine. I tweeted out something like, man, it's a shame America got involved when they did. The Houthis might have been able to save Gaza had they been able to fire one more random salvo of rockets at a civilian vessel. And a bunch of people got mad at me for it, which is very funny because nothing that I said there was inaccurate. I like a lot of them got mad in a statement where all I did was plainly describe what they were doing, which it's just funny because people get very defensive over a frank description of what the Houthis are doing that isn't like qualified with a bunch of dishonest, you know, narratives. So what has Emma been tweeting? To stand with Israel when it's being charged with by post-apartheid side, I agree with this, blah, 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 blah. Sports? Imagine caring about sports. My goodness. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. I don't see anything about the Houthis. Sports stuff. Can you imagine? I'm vomiting. The Houthis have the ability to bottleneck the Red Sea, have had the ability to bottleneck the Red Sea since 2015, and they're not fresh off the turnip truck morons. So I'm sure they've known that could be a huge source of leverage. This refusal to even consider that Gaza might really be their motivation is bonkers. Even if Gaza was their motivation, it wouldn't matter. International maritime trade is a no-go. Can't f with that. But also the fact that they've lied about which targets they're going after, switching between we're only blockading Israel to we're going after everyone, you know, sort of like cast doubt upon their sincerity. Also the fact the Houthis historically have not really done much to like help Palestinians, you know, like they're both in a diplomatic and like realpolitik level, they haven't really engaged that much. They're taking advantage of the situation in Gaza as a pretext, you know, like they're using it as an excuse to bolster their you know, their cred essentially. I don't know, man. I have what some may consider a dumb idea, but here it is. Stop the bombing of Gaza and the attacks and commercial shipping will end. Why not try that approach? Can you imagine if there was an injustice happening and then somewhere else in the world, somebody like robbed a bank, fired guns at a bunch of people, but like miraculously didn't hit them. And they were like, yeah, if you want us to not rob banks, why don't you stop that other crisis? Like, why should I take that at face value? Why should I care? Like, why would I do that? Why wouldn't I stop both things? And if America isn't going to stop the crisis in Gaza, which they're not, because America's evil, then at the very least we can stop the bank robbery, right? Like, just because the crisis isn't going to be stopped doesn't mean I don't want the bank robbery to be stopped. Like, that's not that you know, you can like you can still want that. I don't have to accept the existence of a bad thing just because another bad thing exists, you know? I don't have, like, yeah, it would be like, yeah, stop, until major Western corporations stop contributing to the climate crisis, I will be, like, bombing elementary schools, you know? If you, hey, how about instead of stopping the elementary school bombings, you stop the climate change crisis that's causing the bombings, you know? Like, it's just, it doesn't. Shouldn't we try negotiating first with the Houthis? We asked them to stop multiple times. Yeah, but they're not bombing elementary schools. That's right. They're threatening international maritime trade, which is significantly more destructive than bombing elementary schools. Have they even caused a fatality yet? The harm in piracy is not the sailors that get killed. You could kill thousands of innocent civilian sailors and not even put a dent in the damage that would be done by disrupting international supply lines, you know? The harm present here, like, again, people like massively underestimate the extent to which the world relies on this trade. They tried to kill people, they're just too incompetent. I mean, they did fire rockets at ships, you know, like it's not a point to their credit they have bad aim. Again, the entire UN is fine with this. Everyone's fine with this, even Russia and China. Is harming Israel's supplies the only move they have? They're not harming Israel's supplies. They haven't gone after a single ship that was like inbound to Israel. Israel primarily trades with Europe, you know? They can't block that trade. Like, they don't have control over that area. They're south of Israel's ports, not north of them. Like, they're just shit up, you know? But they're not doing anything to stop Israel meaningfully. They're just doing terrorism. You know, it's kind of like lends doubt to the credibility of their, you know, their crusade here. Another L for terrorism? Yeah, no kidding. What do campists think about the fact that China and Russia supports the strikes? There's no consistency. They'll deny that they support the strikes. They'll pretend they don't. The Houthis didn't happen in a vacuum. We, the US and UK, are kind of responsible for their existence. Sure, but that has nothing to do with that, right? Like, I agree, and I think that we should change our Middle Eastern, like, foreign policy, but that doesn't mean, like, no matter how many bad things we've done, that doesn't mean we have to then allow them to do a bad thing, you know? You can argue hypocrisy, and you should. Hypocrisy is present, you know? We should be stopping Israel. We're not. We shouldn't have supported the Saudis killing Yemenis, but we did, you know? That's valid. But at no point do you have to throw your hands up and go, well, like, that would be like if you had a bunch of white cops in a racist city, right? A city that had a long history of oppressing black people, and like the cops tend to be really like partial, like they tend to let white criminals go but not black criminals, and then a black guy starts like a bunch of kids or whatever, and then like the cops go in, you're like, oh wow, you know, well, why don't you go after the other things? It's like, okay, well, yeah, the cops should go after other stuff as well. I agree, there should be like more equality, but you don't solve that by like letting the rapist get away, you know? That's just not, it's like the systemic critique of the behavior of the police can be carried out while also believing that in this instance, whether it be by partiality or impartiality, this invocation of the law is justified. The cop can stop them immediately. Our airstrikes cannot. Well, I mean, yeah, it's more complicated than a single guy being arrested, but our airstrikes can probably do something. Now, if our airstrikes end up being totally ineffective, that's a valid argument. Like, that's a valid critique. If this whole thing pans out in a way where we weren't able to meaningfully stop the Houthis, then I think that's a reasonable thing to sort of like invoke as a counter argument, but not the other stuff. It's not completely stopping trade. The other route takes 10 extra days. Adding 10 extra days is incredibly big deal. What Houthis have done is make international shipping more expensive, and that's why the whole world is fine with murking them? Yes, of course. But what do you think making trade more expensive means? It means it takes more time and human effort, which means that it's harder to do, which lowers the efficiency of trade, which means that the speed of like shipping vessels, like circulating their whole route, takes significantly longer, which means that fewer deliveries can be made. Making things take longer, making them more expensive is a threat, you know? Again, you might get your Funko Pops 10 days later, and the shipping might take a little bit more, you know, whatever. But there are people who rely on medicine and grain, antibiotics, their food supplies come in through import. And as those imports get more expensive, and exports get more expensive as well, because all trade has gotten more expensive, that means that grain piles up in silos and cargo bays while waiting for prices to fall. People can't afford to pay shipping on exports or imports. People starve. Like, it's a big deal. It's the fundamental infrastructure of the world. You can't go after it. It's a no-go. I will, under very few circumstances, will I ever support any effort to disrupt international trade. It's not a capitalism thing. It's not a Funko Pop thing. It is just the bedrock upon which the world is built. We don't live in like, Khmer Rouge-esque, like agrarian, junta isolationist society where everyone, grows their own food or whatever. People rely, life or death, people rely on this stuff. We in America or the West are wealthy enough that we can ride out the cost of, trade disruptions, the Suez Canal crisis. But I'll take a look. We found the crisis at the Suez Canal, the ship that ran aground, very funny because it's objectively funny. But if you would, why don't you look up what that blockage in the Suez Canal, which is effectively what the Houthis are doing again in the Red Sea, why don't you look up what that did to some poorer countries, what that disruption in trade meant to them? Because on our side of things, we got our Shein and Alibaba deliveries a little bit late, but a lot of countries were full on panicking. I mean, we're talking like they needed that shit, you know? Not to take away from the fact that the Suez crisis was objectively hilarious, but like it is worth reminding yourself that not everyone lives in a society where we enjoy such a margin of error when it comes to trade like this, you know? Sometimes the consequence of lacking trade is that people just die. Leftism nowadays seems very isolationist. Yeah, I'll tell you, the poor, suffering third world does not appreciate what the Houthis are doing. It's also a matter of instability. It's not even just a matter of the lines being blocked. Even the threat of the lines being locked can deter shipping companies from making those routes. They don't want to have their stuff stolen by the Houthis or redirected or captured by the Houthis. So, you know, they raise their prices. Why not get UN approval? We did. There was a UN resolution condemning the Houthis, like right before we started firing inland. Neither China nor Russia blocked the vote. Sending ships around Africa effectively doubles the length of shipments from Europe to Asia, meaning you need twice the fleet to handle the same amount of goods. Yeah, presumably these ships aren't always filled to capacity, but it is certainly like a significant issue. Yeah, 100%. More wear and tear in the boats because they're going on longer routes as well, which contributes to maintenance costs, which get reflected back in the price of shipping. You know, I understand what you're saying, but do you think despite the approval, the strikes could still disrupt ceasefire talks between Yemen's conflicting parties? You mean with the Saudi Arabia? I don't think so. Saudi Arabia is putting on a show of denouncing what we're doing, even though they quietly approve of it. So I don't think so. Strikes risk escalation of conflict in the Middle East. Okay, what do you mean by that? Because people say the Middle East is a big place with lots of groups of people, with lots of complicated, like, what do you mean by that? You know, because like, do you mean that other Iranian-backed Islamist militias will attack U.S. bases? Because they've been doing that since October 7th. They've already been doing that. What do we mean exactly, right? It's complicated. Couldn't Iran direct their proxies to do more attacks? They have been. There have been hundreds of them. Attacks on U.S. bases, Middle East, since October. We've literally shown this on stream before, so this isn't like an unknown variable. Okay, here we go. This is the one that popped at the top, okay? Pentagon confirms 74th attack on U.S. troops in Middle East since October 17th. 17th, not 7th? Okay, whatever you want to choose, I suppose. But this article is from November 30th, so more time has passed. We saw it earlier. I remember the number being around 150 attacks, and that article was about a week old when we saw it, so it could be 160, 70, I don't know. At least 100 attacks since October. This one's from November. So yeah, it's creeping up. Anyway, the attacks are already happening. Iran is big mad. Pot shots are different from full-on action. These are mostly for show by these proxies. I mean, sure. But I mean, what's the solution to that then? We just let Houthis engage indefinitely in piracy for like the funsies because we're afraid of some Iranian-backed militias? You got to protect the international shipping lanes, you know? You got to protect them. Yes? No. Even if we try to start negotiating with Israel, what are we supposed to do? In fairness, like, we could have done and could still do far more with regards to Israel and stopping the crisis than we are. We aren't stopping them because we're evil. We're evil. We're demonic. If we weren't demonic and weren't evil, then we could do more. But we, unfortunately, are demonic and are evil, so we're not doing shit. You know, that's how it is. We'll see if Hezbollah gets involved at any point. You know, like, if Hezbollah actually commits to an invasion, that could be spicy. I mean, you want to talk about escalating conflict in the Middle East. I mean, that's escalating conflict in the Middle East. Hezbollah, if you hear me, tie me to a rocket. How much more powerful is Hezbollah over Hamas? Hamas is nothing. Hezbollah is a military. It's not even really comparable. You know, it's not really comparable. The Iran-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah said on Sunday U.S. actions in the Red Sea would harm the security of all shipping, and the area has now become a conflict zone. Saying the Houthis of Yemen would keep up attacks despite U.S. and British strikes. Dude, what? America has made the area a conflict zone after the Houthis started attacking and seizing random ships in the area? Yeah, well, whatever. They're all going to back each other. They're all, like, funded by Iran. I don't think Hezbollah will. It's just not worth it to them, and nobody in the area actually cares about Palestinians. Yes, but they do hate Jews. So, you know. American intel officials warn risk of Hezbollah attacking United States. At last, the final battle. It's finally time. Fukuyama, eat your heart out, okay? It's time. Let's go, idiots. What would you do if you were a Yemeni and wanted to protect Palestinians? If I was a Yemeni, I don't know. I would go to my, like, hut and, like, try not to get killed or... Do you have any idea what Yemen is? I would simply avoid the Saudi airstrikes and also avoid having my daughter taken by, like, a high-ranking Houthi official, you know? It's not like a stable country over there, you know? Like, if you mean, like, Houthi militants, like, they can keep firing rockets at Israel if they want. I was fine with that, you know? Yeah, it's sort of limited power here, I feel. Saudi Arabia doesn't airstrike anymore? No, they haven't been for a little while. They're doing diplomacy. Now we do the airstrikes, you know? Can Lebanese rockets reach us? Yeah, the Houthis are in possession of multiple nuclear ICBMs, folks.